You're watching UATV English. We broadcast from the heart of Europe, Ukraine's on air. Hello and welcome. My name is Anna Nichenko. Ukraine's bold strategy for security and future of global South. That's our topic for today. So, the development of relations with African countries is very relevant in the context of increasing Ukraine's attention to the global South. And it is not only about grain.
African countries are mentioned today mostly in connection with the grain agreement. But we can and should talk not only about grain. Ukraine has something to offer African countries. We have to restore our presence in Africa in many areas. So we are talking about the military and technical sphere, and about grain hubs, and about the return of students. In addition, African countries are certainly interested in what we did with Wagner. They want to get rid of the influence of this structure. And Ukraine has an interesting experience here. Head of the President's office, Andriy Yermak.
The task of Ukrainian diplomacy now is to win over the leaders of African countries who are still mostly neutral in relation to Russia's war against Ukraine. But it is already known for sure that they are interested in ending the war, because this is the main issue of their food security.
We can say without exaggeration that the leader of the Republic of South Africa, Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa, radically changed his attitude towards Ukraine precisely after this visit. And today the leaders of African countries want to hear President Zelensky. They make proposals for official visits, and I predict that a visit to the Republic of South Africa will be quite possible already this year. Head of the President's office, Andriy Yermak.
Restart relations with African countries. Such a task for 2023 was set for Ukrainian diplomats by President Zelensky. According to him, 10 states have already been identified where new Ukrainian embassies will be opened. The countries of the African continent have long been the largest trade and economic partners of Ukraine. They bought and continue to import the largest amount of grain, as well as metal products, fertilizers and other goods. Therefore, further cooperation is important for both sides.
I'm grateful to Saudi Arabia for providing a platform for negotiations. Recently, a meeting was held in the same format. It was held in Copenhagen. It is very important that the world sees that everyone will benefit from a just and honest cessation of Russian aggression. The liberation of Ukrainian land from the occupiers means the restoration of full compliance with international law and the UN Charter. To remove all the threats emanating from Russia for Ukrainian and global security means restoring calm in international relations and stability in life in the world.
Another message from Russia: military coup in the Republic of Niger. The overthrow of the pro-European president of Niger increases the risk of the country going over to Russia. According to experts, Putin wants to see the same scenario in Ukraine.
This whole summit, the whole Russian policy in Africa, it is centered around the fact that it is necessary to win the war. War is the conduct of politics by other means in turn.
And now we will talk more about the details with our guest, Yaroslav Bushko, head of Doctrine Center for Political Studies. Hello and welcome.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. So now the hottest spot in Africa is, of course, Niger. In your opinion, what are the reasons for the situation there? And what about Russian ears that stick out there?
As for me, Russian Federation just wait for a good moment to share their influence on all this Niger destabilization situation. As for me, now Russian military specialists, members of Wagner private military company and so on, are not involved in our process of military coup in Niger, but it's absolutely real that we can see Russian forces in Niger in next months when their situation will stabilize and we will see maybe some new government, what should be recognized as illegal government, as military dictatorship that can negotiate with Russia. And as for me, the main task will be does the neighbors of the Niger really can provide this military intervention to restore the democratic government and to restore the normal constitutional law in country?
And during the Russia-Africa summit, Putin promised grain for the countries of the continent. How does this, in your opinion, correlate with the stoppage of the grain deal?
As for me, Russia using grain deal as a political tool to make sanctions more weak. Yes, they can support grain deal if they will get some maybe normal, enormous, I should say, enormous rules for several banks that are connected with their agricultural sphere. And this is just a tool to push on another countries. Russia says that they can send grain to Africa without grain deal and so on and so on. But as we see by, for example, President Ramaphosa statements to Russians, that Africa don't need such presence. Africa need a way to buy Ukrainian grain. Africa need a real normal market process that will give them ability to Ukrainian grain and to grain from another countries. They don't need that such humanitarian aid for Russia. They would like to buy and to have such number of grain that they need and that they can buy by their economical strength.
Speaking about Kyiv, we understand that the main aid that Ukraine can provide to Africa is food and grain. But what else can our country offer? Well, apart from the peacekeepers who have been working successfully in Africa for a long time.
First of all, Ukraine can sell them some medicines, drugs, and so on, so on. We can support African different programs of education. We can educate a lot of students from Africa. And as we see now, a lot of students from Africa, for example, were involved in education process in Ukraine, especially in sphere of medical education, of biochemical education, such spheres. Their third statement is that we can sell to Africa some Ukrainian products by our chemical industry, our machinery that we still has, and so on, so on. In general, we need to provide much more complicated policy towards Africa to create a more wide agenda, to create a more successful agenda, and to works a lot to give to African governments a lot of knowledge about Ukrainian situation, about the Ukrainian economy, about our factories, about our markets, and so on, to find the opportunities.
And continuing the topic of peacekeepers, but already on Ukrainian territory, can Africa do something about Russian aggression against Ukraine?
First of all, we should say Africa can sometimes, not very often, but sometimes can sell us weapons. As we see, a lot of Ukrainian weapon was sold to Africa in 1990s and so on. And then Ukraine tried to buy these weapons from Africa. And as we see in several situations, it's absolutely realistic. So we can buy weapons. We can buy a lot of different resources from Africa. And as for me, it's absolutely normal to speak about the political influence of Africa. Yes, Africa now is not very strong as another regions of the world, but a lot of countries of the world see and would like to connect their position with position of African countries, because they would like to have much more globalized order, much more complicated understanding of the world situation, and political support from several African governments that Ukraine has now should be increased in next years.
How do you think does African leaders do African leaders understand all the circumstances of this Russian aggression, and what else should Ukraine do to explain all these circumstances?
First of all, no, they in a lot of cases they hasn't normal knowledge about the Ukraine. The main problem is that we really don't have a lot of specialists, a lot of centers, a lot of state programs, and so on, that can work with African audience, that can work with African media, for example, that can work with African state experts and experts from African civil society. Is the first and the main problem that we hasn't normal such number of specialists who can work in this field. The second problem is that we just start to open a lot of ambassadors in African country. Before this, we have only 10 ambassadors in all Africa. It's a very small number, and we should understand that Russia have much more, and Russia have not only ambassadors but also trade organizations in Africa, has prom offices in Africa, and so on and so on. It's too big problem for Ukraine to looking for normal infrastructure to create this knowledge about Ukraine for Africans.
And if Russian aggression won't be stopped, what would happen to Africa?
First of all, we should say that Africa become much more poorer than before, as we see from the documents of the World Bank report in 2022. First of all, the main global problems connected with this war will take place in resource markets, and these problems will mean that prices will be much more high, and it will be the biggest problem for poorer countries such as Africa. A lot of people from Africa will live in poverty for a lot of years, and it will connected with bad quality of food. It will be connected with bad quality of energy systems of Africa, and so on.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for all these explanations. And I'll remind to our viewers it was Yaroslav Bushko, head of Doctrine Center for Political Studies. And I will also remind you some information. Events developed rapidly in the West African country. On July 26, literally one day before the start of the Russia-Africa summit in St. Petersburg, soldiers of the President Guard blocked the residence of Niger President Mohamed Bazoum. And a few days later, the head of the Presidential Guard, Abraham Chiani, declared himself the new leader of Niger, once a colony of France. In assessing these events, Europe, the United States, and the African Union showed unity. They don't recognize the rebels and called for the release of the inhuman president.
We are united in condemning the actions that have taken place in Niger, calling for the immediate release of President Bazoum, calling for the immediate restoration of the democratic order in Niger.
The leaders of the countries of the Economic Community of West African states met specially to condemn the actions of the rebels. They are ready to go to the most extreme measures.
In the event the authorities' demands are not met within 1 week, take all measures necessary to restore constitutional order in the Republic of Niger. Such measures may include the use of force.
What is happening in Nigeria is quite consistent with Russia's traditional policy in Africa. In words, Moscow comes out with anti-colonial rhetoric, accusing Europe and the United States of
the history of Russian presence in Africa. It's about Wagner, it's about covert operations, it's about black schemes, it's about diamonds, it's about weapons. It's about business supported by Russian special services. It's not exactly a kind of good story.
And there was a real chance for the world to hear from Ukraine the truth about the Russian war and for Kyiv to discuss peacekeeping, the White House said. The next step after the summit should be the global summit, but already at the level of world's leaders. Though that's all for today. Thank you for watching. We broadcast from the heart of Europe. See you.